Welcome to Framework, the podcast that makes the NIST cybersecurity framework practical, engaging, and accessible. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, business leader, or simply curious about how organizations defend against cyber threats, this series is for you. This podcast is inspired by a comprehensive guide to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, a best-selling resource written by cybersecurity expert Dr. Jason Edwards and trusted by professionals worldwide. In each episode, we'll leverage a few insights from Jason's extensive book to dive deep into CSF 2.0, unpacking every function, category, and subcategory with real-world applications you can immediately use. If you're enjoying this episode and want to learn more, head over to cyberauthor.me to grab your copy of the book and access additional resources to enhance your cybersecurity journey. You can also visit baremetalcyber.com, where over 2 million people last year explored expert insights, articles, and practical tools across a wide range of cybersecurity topics. DE.CM-06 Monitoring External Service Providers. DE.CM-06 ensures that organizations actively monitor external service providers to detect security risks, compliance violations, and unauthorized activities that could impact their cybersecurity posture. This subcategory belongs to the detect function within the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, version 2.0, emphasizing that third-party vendors, cloud service providers, and outsourced IT services must be continuously monitored to prevent supply chain attacks, data breaches, and regulatory non-compliance. Without structured oversight of external service providers, organizations risk unnoticed vulnerabilities in vendor systems, compromised data security due to third-party breaches, and increased exposure to cyber threats originating from supplier networks. By implementing structured monitoring of external service providers, organizations ensure that all vendor interactions, network integrations, and data exchanges are continuously assessed for security risks and compliance violations. A well-defined monitoring framework enables organizations to detect unauthorized access attempts, ensure third-party adherence to contractual security obligations, and respond proactively to vendor security incidents. Organizations that adopt continuous third-party risk assessment tools, deploy automated security monitoring solutions, and integrate vendor activity tracking into their Security Operations Center, SOC, improve their ability to identify supply chain risks, prevent data leaks, and maintain compliance with regulatory requirements. Multiple stakeholders play a role in external service provider monitoring. Third-party risk management teams and procurement officers are responsible for assessing vendor security policies, enforcing contractual security requirements, and ensuring compliance with cybersecurity regulations. Security Operations Center (SOC) analysts and IT security teams ensure that external vendor activities, data transfers, and network connections are continuously monitored for anomalies and threats. Legal and compliance officers play a critical role in ensuring that vendor contracts include security clauses, adherence to industry regulations, and audit rights for assessing third-party security controls. Effective monitoring of external service providers is implemented through vendor risk assessments, security performance tracking, and automated third-party monitoring solutions. This includes establishing security service level agreements, SLAS, enforcing real-time data exchange monitoring, and integrating vendor activity logs with security information and event management, SIEM systems. Organizations that fail to implement structured third-party security monitoring solutions risk data breaches due to weak vendor controls, operational disruptions caused by supplier cyber incidents, and regulatory penalties for non-compliance with supply chain security mandates. Several key terms define external service provider monitoring and its role in cybersecurity governance. Third-party risk management, TPRM, ensures that organizations assess and mitigate security risks posed by vendors, suppliers, and business partners. Security service level agreements, SLAS, ensure that organizations define contractual security expectations, performance metrics, and compliance requirements for external service providers. Vendor access monitoring ensures that organizations track and control third-party access to corporate systems, reducing the risk of unauthorized data exposure. Continuous security assessment ensures that organizations regularly evaluate vendor security postures using automated risk intelligence platforms. Incident response coordination ensures that organizations integrate external service providers into security incident response workflows, ensuring rapid mitigation of vendor threats. Challenges in monitoring external service providers often lead to limited vendor security visibility, inadequate third-party compliance enforcement, and increased exposure to supply chain attacks. One common issue is failure to enforce security controls for vendor access, where organizations grant excessive network privileges to external service providers without continuous oversight. Another issue is lack of continuous vendor risk monitoring, where organizations only assess third-party security during onboarding but fail to conduct ongoing evaluations, allowing security weaknesses to go unnoticed. Some organizations mistakenly believe that vendors are solely responsible for their own security without recognizing that a third-party breach can directly impact their systems, data, and business operations. When organizations implement structured monitoring of external service providers, they enhance third-party risk management, improve visibility into vendor security practices, and strengthen compliance with supply chain security regulations. A structured vendor monitoring model ensures that cybersecurity teams continuously assess third-party security controls, business leadership prioritizes vendor risk management investments, and IT security teams integrate vendor activity tracking into ongoing security operations. Organizations that adopt AI-driven vendor risk intelligence, enforce zero-trust access for external providers, and deploy automated third-party security assessment platforms, develop a comprehensive supply chain security strategy that strengthens resilience against vendor cyber threats. Organizations that fail to monitor external service providers face serious security, operational, and compliance risks. Without structured oversight, businesses risk undetected security gaps in third-party systems, unauthorized access to sensitive data, and cyber attacks originating from vendor networks. A common issue is lack of continuous security assessments, where organizations only evaluate vendor security at the time of contract signing and fail to conduct ongoing risk assessments, leaving them exposed to evolving threats. Another major challenge is over-reliance on vendor security assurances, where organizations assume that external service providers are implementing adequate cybersecurity measures but do not independently verify their claims. By implementing structured external service provider monitoring, organizations ensure that all third-party activities, system integrations, and data exchanges are continuously assessed for security threats and compliance violations. A well-defined monitoring framework establishes real-time risk assessment methodologies, enforces security service level agreements, SLAS, and integrates vendor activity tracking into enterprise security operations. Organizations that deploy third-party security monitoring platforms, enforce continuous vendor access auditing, and integrate external service provider risk assessments into compliance reviews improve their ability to detect security gaps, prevent supply chain cyber incidents, and ensure that vendor security aligns with regulatory and contractual requirements. At the partial tier, organizations lack structured third-party monitoring, leading to inconsistent oversight and increased exposure to vendor security incidents. Vendor security assessments are conducted informally or only during onboarding, leaving organizations blind to security risks that develop over time. A small business at this level may use a cloud-based payment processor but fail to monitor access logs, allowing potential unauthorized access to customer transaction data without detection. At the risk-informed tier, organizations begin to establish formal vendor monitoring policies, ensuring that third-party security controls are periodically reviewed. However, security enforcement may still be inconsistent, with vendor security audits conducted manually and vendor activity logs analyzed only after a security incident occurs. A mid-size healthcare provider at this level may require third-party electronic health record (EHR) providers to undergo annual security assessments, but lack continuous monitoring to detect real-time vulnerabilities or unauthorized data transfers. At the repeatable tier, organizations implement a fully structured external service provider monitoring framework, ensuring that vendor security compliance, access controls, and system integrations are continuously reviewed. Third-party risk management governance is formalized, with leadership actively involved in defining vendor security requirements, enforcing access monitoring policies, and ensuring compliance with industry regulations. A multinational financial institution at this stage may deploy an automated third-party risk management platform that continuously evaluates vendor security postures, monitors network access attempts, and generates security alerts for anomalous vendor activities. At the adapted tier, organizations employ AI-driven vendor risk intelligence, automated security risk scoring, and dynamic vendor threat detection to continuously assess third-party cybersecurity risks and refine monitoring policies in real time. External service provider monitoring is fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that vendor security risks are proactively identified and mitigated. A global technology provider at this level may use AI-powered risk analytics to detect vulnerabilities in vendor networks, enforce just-in-time access controls for third-party contractors, and automate security response actions if a vendor threat is detected. Monitoring external service providers aligns with multiple controls in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-53, ensuring that organizations implement structured third-party security governance models and proactive supply chain risk mitigation strategies. One key control is SA-9, External System Services, which requires organizations to establish, monitor, and enforce security requirements for external service providers. A cloud services provider implementing this control may require all third-party vendors to undergo continuous security testing, validate their compliance with industry security frameworks, and provide independent security audit reports. Another key control is CA-7 continuous monitoring, which mandates that organizations regularly assess and track the security posture of external service providers to detect potential vulnerabilities or compliance gaps. A government agency implementing this control may use automated third-party risk management tools to analyze vendor security practices, detect unpatched vulnerabilities in external networks, and generate risk scores for ongoing vendor relationships. Monitoring external service providers also aligns with PS-7, third-party personnel security, which requires organizations to establish and enforce security policies for contractors, vendors, and external personnel who have access to enterprise systems. This control ensures that organizations screen external personnel for security risks, enforce background checks where necessary, and establish strict policies governing third-party access to critical business. A multinational banking institution implementing this control may require third-party financial auditors to undergo identity verification, security awareness training, and multi-factor authentication before accessing corporate financial records. These controls can be adapted based on organizational size, industry, and cybersecurity maturity. A small business may implement basic third-party access controls, ensuring that vendors use unique login credentials and all remote access activity is logged and reviewed periodically. A large enterprise may deploy AI-powered vendor security monitoring, continuous risk assessments, and real-time alerting for vendor security anomalies to ensure that external service provider security policies are dynamically refined and enforced. Organizations in highly regulated industries such as finance, healthcare, and government contracting may require legally mandated third-party security assessments, compliance-driven security audits, and strict vendor access controls to align with regulatory frameworks. Auditors assess an organization's ability to monitor external service providers by reviewing whether structured, documented, and continuously enforced third-party security monitoring frameworks are in place. They evaluate whether organizations implement automated vendor risk tracking, enforce contractual security requirements, and integrate continuous monitoring into enterprise-wide security operations. If an organization fails to monitor third-party security effectively, auditors may issue findings highlighting gaps in vendor oversight, weak alignment between external security monitoring policies and compliance requirements, and failure to integrate structured vendor risk management strategies into enterprise security frameworks. To verify compliance, auditors seek specific types of evidence. Third-party security policy documentation and structured vendor access control reports demonstrate that organizations formally define and enforce external service provider security standards. Vendor risk assessment records and security compliance reports provide insights into whether organizations proactively assess third-party security postures and enforce continuous monitoring. Automated third-party security alerting reports and predictive vendor risk analytics show whether organizations effectively track, monitor, and refine external service provider security strategies using real-world risk assessments and adaptive security controls. A compliance success scenario could involve a global healthcare organization that undergoes an audit and provides evidence that third-party security monitoring strategies are fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that all vendor access is continuously tracked, third-party risk assessments are dynamically analyzed, and contractual security enforcement policies are applied consistently across all vendors. Auditors confirm that vendor security policies are systematically enforced, monitoring mechanisms are dynamically adjusted based on evolving threats, and enterprise-wide cybersecurity governance frameworks align with structured third-party risk management requirements. In contrast, an organization that fails to implement structured vendor monitoring, neglects real-time risk assessments, or lacks formalized third-party security audit workflows may receive audit findings for poor vendor oversight, weak third-party security response capabilities, and failure to align external service provider security strategies with regulatory compliance mandates. Organizations face multiple barriers in ensuring that external service provider monitoring remains continuous and effective. One major challenge is lack of real-time vendor risk visibility, where organizations fail to track changes in vendor security postures, increasing exposure to supply chain vulnerability. Another challenge is failure to enforce security compliance requirements, where organizations establish security policies for third-party vendors but do not actively audit or verify compliance. A final challenge is difficulty managing vendor access across multiple systems, where organizations allow third-party service providers to access multiple environments without implementing zero-trust security principles or just-in-time access controls. Organizations can overcome these barriers by developing structured third-party monitoring frameworks, ensuring that vendor security policies remain continuously optimized, and integrating real-time third-party risk assessment models into enterprise-wide cybersecurity governance strategies. Investing in AI-driven vendor risk intelligence, automated third-party security, compliance validation, and predictive analytics for vendor behavior monitoring ensures that organizations dynamically assess, monitor, and refine vendor security strategies in real time. Standardizing vendor security governance methodologies across departments, subsidiaries, and external business partners ensures that external service provider monitoring policies are consistently applied, reducing exposure to vendors' cyber risks and strengthening enterprise-wide third-party risk resilience. By embedding third-party security monitoring strategies into enterprise cybersecurity governance frameworks, organizations enhance vendor risk awareness, improve regulatory compliance, and ensure sustainable external service provider security processes across evolving cyber risk landscapes. That wraps up today's discussion on framework. Don't stop here. Head over to cyberauthor.me to explore more cybersecurity topics and discover a best-selling book covering NIST and other critical cyber frameworks. Please like, rate, and review this episode on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power.